You can't nuke a network. How would you nuke Bitcoin? You would arm you.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
We're recording this a week or so before the biggest elections of our lives in the government of the United States of America, at least here in California. It's a late evening, a week or so before the election. I'm talking today to a renowned individual, a thinker, an engineer, a creator, sort of a philosopher, a guru to many around the world, maybe millions. And that's Balaji Srinivasan, Dr. Balaji Srinivasan. And I think we barely may have overlapped. I was at Stanford. You were there for a very long time. Maybe I'm a little bit older than you, but we definitely overlapped where we're from. We're both from Long Island. So I think that's pretty cool. I'm actually from Suffolk County, though. So you're from Nassau County, if I understand correctly.
That's right. Just next door.
But anyway, it's the longest island in America, at least, maybe one of the longest islands in the world. We're going to get to the world. We're going to talk about a phenomenal new contribution to the world, and that's Balaji's newest book. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. It's early where you are. It's late where I am. We'll turn up the Zoom, tune up our appearances maximally. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing great.
Thanks for joining us. So as I mentioned, I always like to start off an interview with renowned authors such as yourself by doing that which you are never supposed to do, which is to judge a book by its cover. But Balaji, as you know, what else do you have to go on when you see a new book and all you have is cover and the author's name and the subtitle? So I thought you would start by how did you come up with the name, the network state, the subtitle, the cover design, and the overall gestalt of this magnificent new book?
Well, thanks. Appreciate it. So, maybe you can put the cover just to my left or something while I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
The network state is a seemingly abstract concept that one of the important things that we did is illustrate it like as visually as possible on the cover of the book, and then later in the network state in one image, very early in the book in chapter 1, like basically we did the network state in one sentence, then we get to network state in one image. Basically, it's 2 or 3 pages into the book for the ADD. Okay, and the reason for that is that something that's really abstract or difficult to grasp, often a picture's worth 1,000 words, and when you see essentially a social network with some sort of moral value or some belief that then holds territory around the world that's not contiguous in one place, that kind of illustrates what the network state is. And so what that cover illustrates are 3 different groups that represented by like a yin yang symbol and the Vitruvian symbol and the Bitcoin symbol that own different pieces of territory around the world, but really their capital is in the cloud. And so, they have projections down onto the earth. They might have, 1 million people in the cloud and a few thousand people at each node on the earth. So it might even be like 1,000 to 1 ratio, but those nodes are actually quite important. And those people in the cloud, of course, are scattered all over the earth, but there's a few points of physical concentration. And the fact that those exist are actually very important. Because it means that it's not a purely digital thing. It does have a physicality to it. It's cloud first, land last, but not land never. And so the cover of the book is sort of a way of showing that poetically without, all of the bells and whistles that you'd use to show it with a little more, granularity or operationally. And then if you go to the network state in one image and you click on that image there, or if you look at the GIF in that thing, that gives a more zoomed in view where now you're actually seeing a census, and you're not just seeing that a social network is crowdfunding territory, but you're seeing more than the 4 nodes or 3 nodes that are shown on the cover of the book. You're seeing more like 50 nodes. And those 50 nodes around the world have between like 1,000 to 10,000 people, or actually some go all the way down to 1 person, just somebody in their room, or 2. You might require a node to have at least 2 people. Fine, okay. But let's say it goes down to 2, but up to 20,000 people, and but then the whole thing sums to 1 million people around the world. And it sums to a certain number of square meters around the world. And it sums to a certain amount of annual income around the world if you take all the on-chain income. And then that second image, the network seen in one image, just a few pages in, shows how you can build something that looks a lot like a state. It's got a population, income, and real estate footprint comparable to that of legacy states, but you're sewing together pieces of territory and population from around the world. Much as Bitcoin was a decentralized currency, this is a recipe for a decentralized state, right? So that's what those early images on the cover and in chapter 1 are meant to convey.
Mm. And I wonder if we could immediately kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what a network actually is, and the kind of,
Sure.
as I understand, the fundamental, kind of Newton's laws or Schrodinger equation of
Sure.
network behaviors, Metcalfe's law, which I kind of think about in many ways, but one is entropically, and how you percolate out, sources on nodes, and how those nodes feed together information and the fundamental unit of information. I wonder if we could start by going back to Bitcoin itself. It's obviously central. I mean, you play a huge role in the story of Bitcoin, but I wonder. I've often wondered. I mean, there's nothing about Bitcoin that couldn't have been implemented, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why do you think it took so long? I mean, I'm not diminishing Satoshi's role at all, or any of your contributions, but fundamentally, it's a relatively simple algorithm that's what gives it so much power. Why do you think it came about when it did? I guess that's a succinct way of asking this question. Why did it take so long, or maybe it wasn't so long from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is that certain things, like for example, the hash functions that Satoshi used were not available, 30 years ago, to my knowledge, like the elliptic curve work. And so he had to snap together stuff that was what was the exact date that SHA-256 was published? 2001, I think, by NSA, and then RIPE-MD.
And there were predecessors, right? 128, and it wasn't, completely.
Yeah, no, it's true. There were hash functions, and so basically, I think there are a few things. First is, remember, you needed to have bandwidth suitable enough, and enough people who had computers that were permanently connected to the internet to host the Bitcoin blockchain. And probably even in the year 2001, maybe you could have done that in academia, but at least the initial vision of lots of home computers doing that and being always online and synchronizing back and forth. I mean, peer-to-peer networks, he uses the term peer-to-peer in the white paper, which had at the time fallen out of fashion. But like Kazaa and Skype and so on, they weren't like that old, right? Like Skype, launched, I think 2004, if I'm not mistaken, 2003. Okay. So it's like about 5 or 6 years after Skype. And then there's a financial crisis, which was the cultural trigger.
Yeah.
So you had to have P2P networking. You had to have SHA-256 or probably something similar. At least that came out in 2001. It was relatively soon after all those pieces came together, but, could it potentially have been done sooner? Maybe. The interesting thing is there wasn't, to my knowledge, a Leibniz to Satoshi's Newton. That's say it's not like there was somebody who was putting those pieces together in quite that way at that time, and they just, it's not like Ethereum is wonderful and it's amazing, but it's not like it shipped, 3 months later with a different notation but the same concepts. It was something where Satoshi genuinely pioneered this new thing that people really didn't get for a while, because he started with different premises than the existing system. And so if you start with different premises, then, whatever you build from that, it's not obvious that it's going to actually be useful. Like, for example, if people are like, okay, we're into the concept of internal combustion engines and you build a better one, then it's very easily accepted that it's 10% better, energy or something. When you're talking about a decentralized digital currency, it's not even obvious still to many people that they want that, right? Why wouldn't I just, have the bank hold my money or the government hold my money? They don't understand the concept of digital property rights or what have you yet. And so it's still a non-obvious thing to many people. But about, I don't know, I think about 50% of people get it, thereabouts, depending, when I say 50%, there's hundreds of millions of people around the world who hold cryptocurrency. And then a large enough number of people now get it on some level that they at least understand why it's around. Let's put it like that. Whether it's 50%, it's hundreds of millions of people. That's a better term for it. In absolute numbers, there's a large number of people who get it now at this point. So that's the answer to why didn't it happen sooner?
Mm-hmm.
And we also asked, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
You'd also asked earlier, like, why the term the network state? And that is just something where, sometimes you name a book last, or, this is something where in a sense, I wrote the book in a few months. And in a sense, I wrote the book in several years because I'd been thinking about some of the concepts for a while. Mm-hmm. For example, one critical concept is people don't just judge a book by its cover. They will often judge a book by its title.
Yeah.
For example, how many people have read The End of History versus they've heard the title and a little quick summary, and they argue with it based on their sort of compressed understanding. Right. That's not necessarily a completely wrong thing to do, because that compressed thing, is a summary. But what happens is, obviously, in a compressed summary, you can't answer every single critique and criticism and so on. And some people would, say, oh, Fukuyama didn't consider this, and that, end of history is so stupid. And often he had entertained those counter arguments in the book, which you cannot easily fit into a sentence or two, right?
Right.
Yeah. With that said, a phrase travels, right, like much farther than a full book. So you have to kind of armor up that phrase and have it do as much work for you as possible. Just as an example, like, why do people call themselves democratic socialists? Okay, in their very limited space to kind of convey a message, they use the very first word to say, no, we're democratic socialists. Right. We're not like the communists who are undemocratic socialists, right? So they are intentionally using some very scarce, verbal real estate to preempt the most significant.
The most significant bit is doing a lot of the work in that phrase.
Doing a lot of the work. That's right. Because at the time, like certainly the mid 20th century, that, otherwise they'd be the undemocratic socialists, right? That's why other folks will call themselves, like the Christian socialists. Oh, we're not
progressives, right? Progressives, right? And then you're regressive.
Yeah, exactly. But like if you say Christian socialists, some people would say that, right? Or liberation theology, in South America. Well, we're not godless communists. We're godful communists. Right. But, and so often that word is chosen in such a way as to sort of embrace the fact that people will often just engage with the phrase. Mm-hmm. And network state, you can get a lot out of just the phrase. First is network replaces nation. And so it starts with an N. That's just like a small thing, but it's just like helps fit in the brain in the same way, right? Second is the network actually, if you read the book, there's like 4 definitions of network state that are interesting. The first is the network is actually the people, and the nation and the state are different. Nation is like shared birth, shared descent, like the same root word in Latin is like natality, right? So nasis, I think. Yeah, birth. And whereas the state is the administrative layer above that people. So the nation is the people, the state is the management. It's like labor and management in a factory. They're actually quite distinct, okay? Mm-hmm. And so you could have the Japanese nation and the American state over it. You could have the Kurdish nation and the Turkish state over it, or the Catalonian nation and the Spanish state over it. And those are different, okay? And or you could have the Japanese nation and the Japanese state, and the Japanese state is just a subset of those Japanese people, and a totally different subset would result in a very different kind of state, right? Once you realize those are separable, which is not obvious because you usually hear them as a compound term, then you're like, okay, how can we separate and then recombine in a different way? A network state is one where the network replaces the nation, and now it's not necessarily common descent or common physical location for hundreds or thousands of years, but it's a proposition nation. It's literally a nation of shared belief. And but that's a network today because those folks are online. So the first way is you swap in the network for the nation. The second is the network, because it's on computers, it's logic, it's code, is the state itself. So network state is a way of talking about a state that is governed by the rules of the network, such as law is code, right? Like the whole Larry Lessig concept, right? So the state, the governance is now digital, right? Yeah. A third is when you talk about a state, usually people are thinking about something that's got physical terrain that it controls, right? And in the network state, it does have physical terrain that it controls, but that physical terrain is a network around the world. It's a physical network. It's little pockets, just like on the book's cover, as we were just talking about. So the land of the network state is a network, okay? And the fourth and perhaps most abstract definition is in the book. I talk about like God, state, and network as these three leviathans that people essentially implicitly invoke on a daily basis. Like they live their lives. They often don't think of this explicitly, but it's like, you know, who is the strongest force in their life? Is it Almighty God, right? Is it the US military? Or is it encryption? You know, what is it that stops you from stealing? In the 1800s, it's because you thought you got, you know, hit by a lightning bolt, you get smoked by God if you stole. 1900s, you might not believe in God, but the boys in blue are there. They're throw you in jail. The state will punish you, right? In the 2000s, on the computer network, where there is no obvious God and there is no state, right? It's the network that won't let you steal. Either the social network will swarm you, or the encrypted network or the encryption will stop you from transferring the funds. And what I mean by that is, if somebody steals your cryptocurrency and you're in Idaho and they're in, you know, Eastern Europe or something like that, to go to the Idaho Police Department and file a case, that's no longer a geographical thing. The state is as powerless there, relatively speaking. I mean, maybe you can try and get the FBI or something to do something, but the state is not set up for that any more than the church was set up to really be an administrator in the same way that a secular state is, you know? So the network is like a new Leviathan. And then network state refers to the fact that these Leviathans are like, you know, almost like fundamental forces, and you can take fusions of them, and network state fuses the last two, right? So you can get a lot of the title. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, there's certainly a million different launching off points. And I should say we're limiting this conversation to just twice as long as the conversation you had with Lex Friedman. But you know, because we are heading into election, you know, day in America here, and you're not located here currently, but you obviously have opinions about it. I just wanted to turn to that one phrase that you said, that one of the networks, you know, that was enforcement mechanisms of the past, in fact, mentioned by the founding fathers in the Constitution, was that this was a constitution that was wholly unfit for a non-God-fearing population. In other words, God, you know, fearing their nature was essential. Even the ones that were deist or even atheists of the founding fathers. And so they implemented something which would seem to be sort of subjective and hard to implement in a purely cryptographic or, you know, chain-based reality, when you could do everything with 50.0000.1%, you know, consensus, and that was the Electoral College. And obviously, there's lots of moves to get rid of that, but that's, you know, wholly, you know, it's effectively meant to undo the tyranny of the majority. And I guess I wonder, you know, is there room in a network state for those four different, you know, kind of concepts or previous concepts to still do useful work? In other words, if you had a, you know, say a theocracy, you know, could it also tolerate a network state? And in other words, are they exclusive, say, the belief that held together civilization for thousands of years and instantiated laws between men and fellow men? Is there room for in such a concept as a network state for God, or maybe the revert, you know, the converse question? You know, if you have a state that is purely based on you know, some sort of notion of 10 commandments, whatever you want is your moral code, is there room for, you know, another power to make these decisions almost exclusively numerically, it would seem?
So is there room for another power to make like political decisions? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, is this sort of replacement? I mean, if you viewed it, if you viewed the United States Constitution as being, you know, suitable, as the founding fathers said, only for a God-fearing population, then, you know, is the network state, you know, excluding God, or, you know, vice versa?
Oh, so it's not. So in fact, you know, that's I have this concept in the book called the One Commandment, which you know, I do think that whatever you do for a new community, I think it's I'm sympathetic to DAOs. I like DAOs, but the big problem with a lot of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, they're not really autonomous, and they're not really even that decentralized, except in the location of the people. They often start with a token. They start with money, right? And the problem with that is Have you ever seen Idiocracy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, Mike Judge is a physics graduate of UC San Diego.
Great. Okay. So
and I'm going to have him on the podcast. He promised to come on.
All right, great. Well, so there's a scene there where he's like, wow, you like money too? Me too, right? And the reason that's actually a great scene is it just emphasizes the fact that money is universal barter. It's universally valuable. And when it's universally valuable, then clearly it's not specifically something. I mean, everybody will be like, okay, yeah, I'll take $10. No matter all their ideological differences or whatever, they'll basically take some money. And so what that means is a DAO can bring people in and, oh, wow, we've got 10,000 people in our Discord. Why are there 10,000 people in our Discord? Because they're just waiting for an airdrop. And they'll type it in a funny way, when airdrop or something like that, right? And they're saying it kind of joking, but they're not. The only reason that they're there is for the money. Right. They don't really have a shared belief. They're kind of, right? And so the problem is that while, economics and money and so on, that's good, you have to have a belief structure first of common values. Otherwise, there's many different ways that people can like scam or, engage in low trust activity with each other if they don't think of themselves as part of basically the same group and they're being something other than just this transaction at hand, right? They have to think of themselves as being an iterated game with the other person. And, just like, I mean, there's 1,000 examples of this, but like, shrinkflation.
Mm-hmm.
What that is, right?
Yeah. Hedonic adjustments.
Yeah. You're selling, I don't know, milk, but you sell it for the same price and you call it, milk, but you make the container, it has like less volume of liquid in it, right? And
same size box or but you get less fluid mass.
Less mass in there. And you're just kind of, you're sort of, that's like a company which is, it's reducing the amount that you are getting for the same price, but it's kind of tricking people into still buying it. It's on the line, right? And there's a lot of that borderline stuff that happens if there isn't sort of shared values between the buyer and the seller. And this is for 1,000 things. It's for, it's for labor, it's for, management, it's for 1,000 things, right? So you kind of have to start, whether it's with a shared belief in God, you certainly need a shared belief of something, mm-hmm. And, historically you could say the belief in God, well, that's like a decentralized and scalable enforcer. Why? Because someone who's a God-fearing man, that old phrase, well, even if there wasn't a state around to punish them, even if there wasn't a state, even if they were at the head of the state, if they feared God, well, they'd behave even when no one was watching them because, they might get hit by a lightning bolt or something like that, right? And so there's a rational sense in which you want an irrational actor who's a quote God-fearing person that behaves even when they cannot be punished, or more generally, they believe in something bigger than just the state itself. They behave well even other than that, right?
That's right.
And so in the book I do talk about this one commandment concept, which is I'm not saying that every new startup society or aspiring network state needs to have its own 10 commandments. But you might be able to have one commandment, which is one moral critique of society where you think your society is better. And you kind of need that level of focus, just like a startup company needs a product that is better than the existing marketplace on one very core dimension, because it's very hard to improve on even one dimension. You have to kill it on that dimension. Here, you need a moral improvement on society at large. And you say, for example, just give two examples, cul-de-sac, okay? They're cul-de-sac.com. They're saying cars are bad, right? And so therefore car-free neighborhood is good. Walkability is good. They start with those moral premises, okay? And from that, they derive the concept of let's build a car-free, walkable neighborhood where the cars should push the boundary. A totally different concept is KIFT, K-I-F-T, okay? Also a startup society. And they start with mobility is good, so van life is good, okay? So cul-de-sac is walkability. I don't want to touch a car at all.
Mm-hmm.
KIFT is a different thing, which is I want to be able to see this, huge outdoors and travel and not be bound to one location. Therefore, I'm going to live in a car. I'm a city-free life, not a car-free life. Okay, I'm going to see the great outdoors and so on. What's funny is the same person might actually think, oh, both of these are pretty cool, but they're both mutually incompatible rejections of, modern society. Yet the CEOs are friendly. Okay. And that's actually a pretty interesting thing where, of course, you couldn't combine car free and living in a van at the same time. Okay. Obviously, still, you could imagine someone picking like, okay, I like a walkable neighborhood. I also like the concept of actually seeing this giant country that we're in, and not just, seeing it in picture books, actually going and bathing in a stream. And, today I'm in Nevada and tomorrow I'm in Montana. That's actually pretty cool. I could just drive up there. Wow. Awesome. Right. More generally, you could have, for example, a carnivore community where they only eat meat, or a vegan community where they only eat vegetables and fruit or whatever. And both of those would probably be healthier than the McDonald's community that is the default, right? So essentially what I say in the book is that you do need a common belief. And I think that's abstracted by that's not just like, okay, Balaji just saying something. That is a distillation of countless different communities that have been found in the past. And, one thing I quote is Sir Walter Raleigh and some of the early American communities. There's this historian, Paul Johnson, in an interview with Charlie Rose, which I quote in the book. And what that historian observes is that the early American colonies that were for profit often just gave up in the winter, but those that had a religious belief continued through the tough winters. Just like those who are zealous about crypto continue through the tough crypto winters, right? It's somewhat analogous. It's kind of, it's obviously something of a joke, but it's not completely a joke, right? You need something more than money to carry you forward when the money isn't there. You need to be irrational to achieve the greatest results.
Right. So I wonder in those communities that you talked about, if they would allow any taxicab numbers. And I wonder if you can expound a little bit on your fascination with one such taxicab number, 1729. And the context I want to, so I'd love to hear it in your own voice, because you're such a champion of Ramanujan and his Titanic contributions. But I wonder, in reading the book and coming to the end, it's, essentially a love letter at the very end to him. But the centrality of math, and, math is sort of in some sense, the most abstract. I mean, I always say you can't hand me a triangle. I mean, but the human mind can think about a triangle. You can't hand me infinity. We can think about infinity. But the level where, we sort of meet the instantiation of the network state, I think for the first time, it really would be at a base layer predicated on math, right? I mean, a lot of the operational behavior and the consensus and so forth, and obviously the monetary exchange would all be math based. And so it reminds me of this famous essay by Eugene Wigner, a famous physicist, mathematician, physicist, who spoke of the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the physical sciences, wondering why, for example, the square root of -1, why that has any interplay with electromagnetic fields. Right.
Okay, sure. Yes.
And statistics, which comes from the properties of the state, the mathematics of the state. That's the etymology of statistics, as you know. The classic key variable, key feature metric of that is the normal distribution, which describes populations as a normal population. It has a number pi in it. Why does the ratio of the circle's circumference to its diameter play any role in the governance of a nation? So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the centrality of math in the network states and the various configurations thereof. And
sure.
And maybe also along the way, we'll get into Ramanujan and why he's so important to you.
Sure. Yeah. So on the centrality of math, one thing you just mentioned earlier in the conversation is that, the core thing about the network is Metcalfe's law. And certainly Metcalfe's law, network effect, scales n squared, that's theoretically important. Two things though. First is, depending on the actual network, it's often, much less than n squared. For example, that's the number of potential connections, but, of the 4 billion people on Facebook, it's not like they're actually all literally connected directly to each other. Right. There's, some people have said it's like more like n log n, or
the small world approximation, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's more like K times N or something like that in terms of the actual. And you could actually,
Yes.
Facebook itself could graph this, and there's a bunch of research on this. I haven't looked at the exact curve, but it's not exactly N squared. That's kind of one.
Yep.
The second thing is maybe deeper point related to the mathematics of it. I think for the network, the most important concept, the thing I think about the most, is a very simple seeming thing, but that you can get very far with it. And that is the concept of the graph geodesic distance versus the geographic distance. And the geographic distance, or the great circle distance, is the distance between 2 points on the surface of the Earth, like as the crow flies from one to the other. Okay. And you can think of that as, plane flight distance. You can make a somewhat more complicated version where, for example, South Africa and Argentina, you could easily fly from one to the other, but to walk from one to the other would have been difficult. So you had to go all the way around the Bering Strait and down, the US, right? Like, I'm sure someone has done that ancestral, like, migration of humanity, though humanity didn't come from South Africa, but you know what I mean? Like that huge walk across Asia or whatever, right? Maybe it's possible in the thaw of the, it's probably not possible anymore. You can't get
land bridge, right? Yeah.
Yeah, land bridge. So point is, whether you're talking about it as the crow flies or how primitive man might walk, right? Or surf or whatever, that's like the physical distance in the world. And that's the distance that we're used to in terms of saying people are close or far or what have you. But the geodesic distance, the graph geodesic, is the number of degrees of separation in a social network. And that's actually also a distance metric. And in the technical sense, like, D of A comma B, and it's like non-negative, and it satisfies the triangle inequality and whatever. And the graph geodesic, okay, that is something which is, you can build a geography on it, you can build a topology on it. You basically have something where that shortest path distance between two nodes, okay, it's like it's something that you can, well, first of all, you can do a projection of a graph down into 2 dimensions, and so you can make graph proximity in this relatively high dimensional space. You can visualize it in 2 or 3 dimensions. But second is, it gives you a different intuition about how the space works. For example, a node can instantly connect to another node just by friending a bunch of people, or it can instantly be very far away by blocking them. Yeah. Right. That we know for like an individual. That now extends to entire groups, which we haven't really seen as much on the internet. But a group can suddenly become adjacent to another group by building a ton of connections there. Or it can suddenly break away from a group by, cutting it. It's as if every continent and nation in the world was on wheels, right? One thing we sort of take for granted is Russia, the entity, has kind of been in the same place, and it has ancient geographical relationships, with Turkey and with Eastern Europe and the Caucasus, and then also on its Asian boundary with, I should say ancient, but they have long-standing relationships with Japan and China, right? Yeah. And so, the borders may expand and contract, and that means, Ukraine is inside during the Soviet era and it's outside now. But essentially, Russia has been in the same place, that we kind of take that for granted. By contrast, in the cloud with the geodesic distance, you can have, Ethereum as this cluster, and then Solana suddenly just appears next to it, right? And it's competing with it or what have you, right? And then, Monero is there, and then Zcash just appears next to it, okay? And this is when you take a tech company and it's got some market, and then another tech company just appears next to it and is competing for that same market. Or then it just bows out of the market and it just disappears, okay? These are like large groups of people can just like materialize in space. The intuition is more like virtual reality, where kaboom, a bunch of people can just appear and they can just disappear. Now, that's digital, so the speed is instant. But it's a geography that's closer to our hunter-gatherer ancestry, where you're wandering around and suddenly, boom, another tribe could just appear, and you might be in competition, right? Or boom, it could leave, right? This is just a totally different way of thinking about how states are organized and what have you, because fundamental assumptions about proximity and how governance is done, if the geography keeps changing, then you cannot assume that the geographical borders will remain constant.
Yeah.
If people can connect across borders, you cannot assume that governance within borders is necessarily the right thing. As I was saying to Lex, what's older than borders is no borders,
right?
Because you had hunter-gatherers roaming the entire world, and there's that aspect of humanity that desires to travel the world and see everything and not be bound. And there's the other aspect that wants, there's no place like home, right? That's a fundamental tension within humanity. And the math, I think, illustrates that, where you start realizing the geography of the cloud is just very different than the geography of the land. You can teleport, you can be adjacent, you can be infinitely far with blocking, you can move groups nearby, you can move groups far away. It's as if, these clouds could float around, and they're just much more dynamic and mobile and evanescent and so on than the geography of the land. So I think the metaphor actually, of cloud and land, you can go pretty far with that. Go ahead.
Mm. So thinking back, just to close the loop on Ramanujan. So
oh yes, yep.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, there are two countries that were formed in 1947, 48. Israel and India / Pakistan. Yep. What do you attribute the success of these two different populations? They figure prominently in the book, in one way or another, and some of the work and conversations that you had. What makes them so, either, prototypical of good or bad aspects of potential network state material? And what do you attribute the success or the, they far outnumber most, kind of ethnicities or nationalities, at least if you think of the Jews as a ethnicity only, but, the Indians and Jews do pretty well when it comes to Nobel Prizes, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
But nobody's perfect, right? So, but tell me, what do you attribute, this to, and what is Ramanujan specifically? I mean, he figures prominently in your thinking, obviously, and I don't think you've talked as much about him specifically. So what does he mean to you?
Yeah. First? Yeah. So Ramanujan is, as probably most people watching this know, India's most famous mathematician, and had a very romantic life in the sense of tragic, but like movie worthy. And there's a book and a movie called The Man Who Knew Infinity, and actually Good Will Hunting is based, I believe, in part on his life. Yeah. And essentially was this mathematical genius that grew up in, poverty in India. And then what happened was he, was able to figure out a big chunk of math on his own and wrote these letters to all these mathematicians, most of whom ignored him. But one guy, G.H. Hardy in the UK, paid attention and basically airlifted Ramanujan out, and thus began just a rampage through math. And Ramanujan's notebooks today still, there's journals devoted just to them, where he would just write down these formulas, and then just with intuition he'd get these equations right. Sometimes he had a proof, often he didn't, but quite often those amazing identities, somebody could prove them with a lot of effort, but he would just spit it out like a neural network and may not be able to explain the process necessarily, but you could check them and they're very plausible. And unfortunately, he died very young. Yeah. And when he, on his deathbed, Hardy was coming in to try to cheer him up and said, there's this taxicab that we came in on, the license plate was very boring. Its number was 1729, and he said, no, it's the sum of two cubes. It's the first number, it's the sum of two cubes in two different ways. 1 cube plus 12 cube equals 9 cube plus 10 cube, right? And that's kind of like what E equals MC squared is for the West and India, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's just like this cool equation. I mean, it's on the one hand kind of trivial, once you know it, okay, you're just cubing numbers and summing them together. It's more that he was just on a first name basis with every number and could just whip out this random identity, when someone asked him about something, right? Right. And so that's actually something which sort of symbolizes to me all of what I think of as the dark talent of the world. Just like the Hubble telescope, it's all about the dark matter, right? There's all of this dark talent which potentially is just languishing in obscurity. And just like we had the Hubble telescope, we now have the mobile telescope, and we can go and find all these people, and we can pull them out, and we can actually, basically give them the opportunities that both they deserve and that the world needs, because we need more Ramanujans, right? We need all this talent in, all these places that have just been kind of left out of the 20th century, the quote third world or what have you, or even the second world, people under communist states, people in poor countries. And now they're actually not so poor.
Yeah.
So this is something which, has kind of a mathematical meaning, cultural meaning. It's, it's obviously important for India, but it's important for the rest of the world. And it's something that I think about a lot. I've thought about for many years. And I think now the time is right to potentially go and, in the remote first world, try and find these next Ramanujans.
Yeah. And I want to dovetail that. First by asking a question I asked Michael Saylor almost 2 years ago now. And that was, what is the purpose of money? What is the value of money? I said to him, he's a bachelor. He has no kids, no exes, no spouses of any kind. He said his money is basically going to be for him, and then he's going to save it up, and then he's going to apply it to Saylor Academy and education and so forth. But I asked him, what's the purpose of money? That's what you're going to do with it. But what's the purpose of it? And he basically said power, and money is basically stored up, energy that can be, displaced and used in a variety of ways. And I said, Michael, I hope you're not, forming some like militia, the sailor army. Well, he has a sailor army, obviously, but not of the violent kind. And may it always be like that. But what is it to you, Balaji? What does money do for you? I said to him, like from what Charlie Sheen's character said to Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, the first version of it, said, how many yachts can you water ski behind? What does money mean to you, in contrast to Michael or any other guest that I may have had on?
I think of money as a tool, not an end in its own right. I've nothing against money, but it's very much like it's an acquired skill that I've had in terms of, I've very much started out as like a career academic and just, doing math for a long time and stats and, genomics and what have you. I didn't really care about money too much. And I still don't really care about money. I made myself realize, okay, it's an important constraint that you need to use to get things. But there's some people who wake up in the morning and they go to sleep at night and all they're thinking about is how to increase their balance or what have you, right?
Right.
And instead, really, for example, let's say that you wanted to understand the genome, okay? If you get a grant of $50 million and each genome costs you $1,000 to sequence, that's a historic $1,000 genome price. This is like, 10 years ago. Well, you're limited to 50,000 genomes. But if you can figure out a business model that makes you even $100 per genome on net, you're now unlimited in the number of genomes you can sequence, because each new one, it adds to to your data set, and you can just keep going, right? So if it turns out that you need to find a way to sequence 1 million genomes in order to understand human biology, that now by solving the money problem, by solving the economics and figuring out a business model that can generate that data, you can now accumulate enough data to be able to diagnose and potentially eventually treat diseases, right? That's the way that I kind of think about things. That's what originally got me into, one of the reasons, that got me into actually, okay, let's build a business rather than just doing things in academia. Because business can scale, obviously, and an academic research paper is not meant to scale. It's got a limited study size. Business is meant to potentially grow to infinity. And for those things that need large data sets to understand the world, you're going to need that. And then you get into other aspects where if you want true independence, academic independence, well, if you believe that you have the skills to get, tenure in the hard sciences at a university, you are overlapping with, it's not identical to, but it is overlapping with the skills required to become independently wealthy by, your mid-30s or something like that. And if you can do that, well, then you've got tenure in a different way, right? Tenure itself is like a illiquid asset where you can sort of trade it between universities, and you can be tenured at X place and you can trade it for a tenured track at Y place or Z place. relatively illiquid, but it's somewhat tradable. Whereas money, if you just had the runway for 50 years of just being able to live without going and doing anything, you could just devote that to academics or open source software or what have you. That is, in a sense, a kind of tenure. It's an unbundled version where it doesn't come with the quote, prestige of, a legacy university or what have you. But it's more advantageous in other ways because that money is a negotiable asset. You can just chip a little thing off of it, and then you can go and decide to go and do your open source work in the Bahamas, right? That's pretty nice, right?
Mm.
Like on balance. And it doesn't necessarily have to be Lambos or whatever, but you can just go and code on the beach or be in a warm area or something like that, right? That's nice on the margins, right? You can hire a research assistant. You don't have to go and spend $20,000 or you don't have to go and write a grant to get $20,000 or $50,000 for $100,000 even for a research assistant. You just do it out of your own pocket, right? So that's what money means to me. Is it's a tool to figure out to acquire knowledge eventually, even if there's a lot of indirections in between A and B.
So why do you think that, I made this statement, I had the opportunity to spend some time with Peter Thiel a couple of weeks ago, and I said to him, a fact that I, come across in my research, and that was that, there's basically no one who won the Nobel Prize in physics, at least, or even in economics, died with a net worth substantially greater than, his. Unfortunately, most of not unfortunately, but just a fact that most of the Nobel Prize winners are male. Only 2 living female Nobel Prize winners in physics. But anyway, none of them died. Einstein included. Charlie Towns invented the laser, that Shockley invented the transistor. They are responsible for you and I having this conversation, a billion-fold over, right? And they died basically with less, net worth than their Nobel Prizes. Now, obviously, when I asked them, and I asked at your alma mater, Guido Imbens at Stanford, who won the Nobel Prize in economics last year, I asked him, why aren't all these Nobel laureates in economics billionaires, multi-billionaires? Not connoting that, the conflating rather, the fact that, money is the most important thing. But, for someone who's professional, you made a comment a few minutes ago that you could, the skills are sort of fungible, and that we could become, a businessman or woman or whatever, become independently, but so few of us do it. Now, why is that? Is sort of the question to you. Why do the Nobel, why don't they? Obviously Einstein wanted to have more wealth, and it goes back a long way, the tradition of, wanting to not have a patron, to have the FU money to do stuff on your own without having to take 65 diversity classes and anti-sexual harassment classes and so forth that we have to do, and getting very little time to spend with our students in the laboratory. So why do so few of us do it? And why do so many physicists and Nobel Prize economics, winners, why do they die poor, relatively speaking?
Well, so first of all, it's just maybe an obvious point, but I'll poke at this a little bit. Depending on how you think about it, the point is not to die with a bunch of unspent money.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
Not going to help you.
Bill Perkins, who wrote a book, Die with Zero, on.
Yeah.
That's a great book.
Right. So basically, you can't take it with you.
Right.
What you can do is, do a few things. You can invest in longevity. You can invest in this concept I talked about on the Lex Friedman podcast we tweeted about, called genomic reincarnation. Briefly, if you believe that, eukaryotic chromosome synthesis is going to be as feasible as microbial chromosome synthesis already is, prokaryotic chromosome synthesis already is, you might be able to sequence yourself and then reincarnate yourself in the future if somebody used that money to pay for that reincarnation and that synthesis in the future. Okay. You could pay for life extension. You could pay for that. You could pay for cryonics like Hal Finney did. You could certainly leave money to somebody or something. And I don't have a good answer on that last part, by the way, in terms of what to leave the money to, because I think a lot of the foundations tend to get captured. I think giving it to the government is a waste.
Yeah.
But I also think giving it to, people's children, I see all of these, generally, not always, of course, there's always exceptions. Generally speaking, I find that many of these nepotists who've inherited large amounts of money feel guilty about it. They have civilizational diabetes, because if you haven't built, you feel guilt.
Right. And actually, yeah, the Getty family, one of the scions or children, is now supportive of the, let us deface artworks and protest towards, Monets and Van Goghs. And this is to protest fossil fuel use, which is the only reason that anyone knows this person's name. And you made the point on the Lex Friedman podcast that actually resonates with the Yiddish proverb where the Zaidi, the grandfather plants the tree, the son raises the tree, and then the grandson chops down the tree.
Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
3 generations, exactly.
That's right. And the thing about this is basically with something like that, what's happening there frequently, and there's this documentary called Born Rich by, I think, the Johnson & Johnson heir, which is worth looking at.
Yeah.
What's happening there is, I think, a few things. First is sometimes the people feel, I think wrongly, but they feel guilt, not just that they didn't work hard, but, oh, my fortune was acquired in some ways, illegitimately. Oh my God, right? But then they don't actually want to give up their fortune. Instead, they want to expiate their sins by making you pay for it.
Right.
I made $1 billion because I have $1 billion because my great whatever, made a lot of money in oil, but I think oil is bad today because I've read some stupid propaganda. So therefore, and what I mean by that is like, yes, I think nuclear is better, but like, there's trade-offs with everything. And like, you won't have a modern civilization without oil. You wouldn't have something to complain about with that, right?
Right. You can't make a solar panel without some oil processed along the way.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Like turbines, for wind or solar, like first of all, they take up a huge amount of space, as if you're seeing like a wind farm or solar installation. It's not like a little
can't be recycled.
The energy,
right?
Yeah, the density is just very low. And second is it's, whatever. But point is, these folks, for I think bad reasons, feel extremely guilty about oil. And the way they expiate their sins is by making you pay.
Right. By the way, Balaji, I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with inheriting wealth. I think, when you hear people, oh, I'd be rich as you if I inherited money, to some lottery winner. Look how many lottery winners not only lose all their money, but like commit suicide or murdered, or like, it's actually very difficult for these scions or whatever to actually steward their money and then actually do something good with it. But as you're saying, there is the guilt is a very powerful emotion, right? So it overwhelms us.
Right. So the thing about inherited, I mean, I'm not like, as I said, I don't have a good answer on this as of now.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think it works to give it to a foundation often because that foundation will allocate in a bad way frequently. Ford Foundation, Rockefeller, Carnegie, not in my view being really good in how they allocate money. They become very, they just get entrained with the establishment, right? They are now, they're just allocating the same stuff. It's nothing unique. I mean, actually, the one thing that I do think is a pretty good kind of grant is like the Clay Math Millennium Prizes. That I actually think is pretty cool, right? That's hard to corrupt. It's genuinely benefiting all of humanity. The solutions to those math problems, if they're derived, easily worth $1 million each. And it's hard to corrupt and valuable through infinity. It's possible that maybe some open source thing or some smart contract that executed what your wishes could be as good. Possible. But yeah, so with respect to this, I think that why did we get on the topic of inherited wealth? It was the J&Js or so the Gettys, right? So what happens is they expiate their sins by making you pay. There's something else which happens, which is when money is in abundance, then people want status. And when status is abundance, people want money, right? So when these folks are born rich, oh, they have all the money. Okay, well, now they want to be respected. Well, no one's going to respect them for just being an oil heir.
Right.
By taking a stand against oil, now suddenly, oh, wow, the chattering classes say nice things about them. So they get positive feedback, right? So the social incentives drive it. Conversely, if status is in, abundance, you want money. And this is like what I think David Brooks wrote about years ago. I think it's like Megan McArdle has written about this status income dishomogamy, where you have a journalist who is palling around with all of these wealthy people. And, they're in fact concerned about what they'll write, but then they go home to like a small apartment or something like that. and so status is much higher than their income. So what they do, they constantly write about how, we need to abolish billionaires and so on.
Right.
And the thing is, they're actually upper middle class typically, or at least middle class. So in the top whatever percent of the world, certainly top 10%, maybe top 5% of the world. And when they say they want equality, they don't actually mean that they should be pulled down to global median income. What they mean is that tiny percent of 4% of people above them should be pulled down to them, right? So by equality, they actually want ascendance, right? They actually want to level up. Once you realize that that's actually the goal, you can pitch something very different, which is the level up. And that is actually the difference where, what the founder mentality is pitching essentially the personal level up, which allows them to transcend, which is actually the true goal. Very few people, quote, actually want equality, even if they purport to it. What they want is for those above them to be pulled down, not for themselves to be reduced to the global median.
I mean, you've moved to, out of America. So I do feel like would there ever be a scenario where you could see America being a good place for you to put your resources, your talent, your time, and your money?
I mean, obviously, like, this is a very complicated topic that's hard to reduce to just a soundbite. But I think the short version is I have always been, and I'm still in favor of American values. I think the particular American state and establishment has traduced those values broadly. And in particular, the U.S. was the undisputed hyperpower of 1991. With even moderately good management, you could have had probably 100 years of peace and prosperity, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And what's happened is the U.S. establishment over the last 30 years has probably blown the biggest lead in human history. San Francisco is being turned into like this, open air drug den.
Failed state, failed city, failed city. I mean, to the north here, I can make fun of them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's happening here too. I mean, in San Diego used to be the last bastion. Now there's homeless camps that stretch for 5 square city blocks. And I've had the mayor on my podcast. He's a Democrat, Todd Gloria. I've had Republicans on, and it seems like there's just unwilling to really take on these huge challenges, which, as you're saying, we have the resources. I mean, California is the 4th largest economy in the world now.
It's not. It's not. In fact, actually, in some ways, it's the money is the bad part, because many poor countries around the world manage basic functional civil order. They have far less money. The money is not the constraint at all. It's actually the wrong belief system. And it took me a while to understand what the heck was going on, because, with communism, at least I kind of understood it at the level of, okay, let's all gang up and rob this rich guy and have some ideological justification for that, right? Genghis Khan, but with an ideological overlay, that's like Stalin, right? So communism, at least I didn't agree with it, but I understood it. Okay. With, the wokeness that has taken over these cities, I'm like, what political ideology would actually want to cover a city in feces? Like, that just seems negative sum for everybody. That's not even like,
it's not
communism
helping.
Communism is at least marketed as zero sum. Okay. We will all rise while we rob this rich guy. Why is he rich? While we're poor? I get that, even though I think it's bad, because I think it's actually negative sum. What actually happens is the poor and the rich guy both end up in the gulag. Everybody loses, But with wokeness, I was like, why do people want to like cover the streets in poop? That seems obviously the bad. Then I realized that actually a lot of these activists, and that's actually where it's a big part of what's driven by. They have this mental model that, some captain of industry walks out of his high rise and he steps in poop, and now he understands the plight of those who he's normally pushed out of sight. If you notice, when we talk about the homeless, these folks will say, well, I'm so sorry it's visible to you, huh? As if it had just existed and now it's suddenly being made visible to you, as opposed to what's actually happened, which is that the provision of syringes and, quote, safe injection sites and so on has actually created a gigantic class of folks who are either drug abusers and or mentally ill and or have some issue where you can decompose the, quote, homeless problem. The word doesn't actually encompass it. There's folks who are addicted to drugs. There's folks who are mentally ill. There's folks who are criminals. There's folks who just want to live on the streets and just have a handout or what have you. And then there's folks who are genuinely, for whatever reason, down on their luck and living in a car or a van. But that last group is not the same as someone who will just, poop on the street and smash somebody with a
Right.
brick.
They're different
for walking by.
populations. Yeah.
It's different populations, right? And actually the term quote homeless conflates fairly different things. So first of all, you're mislabeling it. The word is wrong because you think, oh, that means we need to build more houses. Housing is not a cure for mental illness.
Right.
Okay. Girders are, it's just totally different things. You're conflating two different things. And so they just have the wrong concepts on this. And once you realize that this activist is looking forward to this captive industry being humiliated and seeing the plight of the poor, finally you realize that actually what these folks are doing is they're kind of using the homeless as native advertising in the following sense. These somebody's mentally ill is for example, they attacked a woman in San Francisco on camera right outside her apartment. Like this crazy guy was not like letting her go inside. This immigrant woman was trying to get into her apartment. Do you remember this thing? It was like a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
And then what is actually happening is, so that woman might survive. Fortunately, she survived this attack. She was I think relatively unharmed, but it was very scary. She could have just been like dragged into the dark, and who the heck knows, right? And so what might happen, I don't know her specifically, but what would happen is, okay, come around the next election, she would vote for somebody who promises to, quote, solve the homeless problem or address the homeless problem, right? And what does that mean? That means more budget to, quote, solve the homeless problem. And that actually means more budget for syringes and these billboards in San Francisco that say something like, snort crack, but don't inject it.
Right. Heroin. Right. Yeah.
I'm not even, hold on. I'm going to get the exact billboard. San Francisco drug billboards. Right.
Can't go too hard. They might be a sponsor of the podcast, so please don't be too harsh on them.
Okay. Sure. Fine. So no overdose, right? Change it up. Injecting drugs carries the highest risk of overdose. So try smoking or snorting instead. Okay.
And crop rotation.
Yeah. They put these on buses. And of course that, this is marketed as being actually, being real. Come on, man. Obviously, it's naive to say people won't use drugs. So therefore we just need to kind of meet reality where it is and so on. This is like the total opposite of people being like, oh, okay. Everyone's going to be racist, so therefore we just kind of need to meet reality where it is on this, right? So on some,
it's like saying like a wife, her husband's going out of town, and she says, "Oh, in case you cheat on me, please use a condom." I mean,
well, right? It's basically something which is like, they are what's actually happening, and this is the key step in this whole cycle that I had to realize, that homeless industrial complex, when it gets budget, it increases the size of the homeless problem.
So it's not a budget. Right.
Well, that's right. In fact, it's opposite. What happens is the number of, quote, activists and this homeless industrial complex has grown with the homeless population itself. So it's the feed the pigeon society. Look at all these pigeons. Oh my God. And they're actually creating the problem. They are exacerbating the problem, and they're paid to exacerbate the problem, and they're paid to not understand that they're exacerbating the problem. Whether you call it natural selection, I doubt it's like fully conscious, but their actions are making the problem worse. And therefore,
if they care about, right. I mean, mental illness is not going to be cured by, safe syringes, and drug problems certainly won't be either. But it's like, that's the Band-Aid that, covers up the, the triangular knife blade scar. And it's, but do you feel like I mean, would such analogous things happen in a truly, networked state? And then, again, getting back to the question, like, what would it take to return your business back to California? I mean, to be crude about it.
I don't know. I mean, like, what does it take to return your business back to Detroit? What does it take to return your business back to like that? How about bring it back to Greece or Rome? Like, I think that era in civilization is over.
And I'm not like, I shouldn't suppose that you're not happy where you are. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm
No,
saying.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. I mean, I can give a recipe. I'll come to that in a second. One
Yeah.
thing I want to say also is basically, if one of the things that's recently finally being kind of featured in the press is like the mothers of these drug addicts, right? Like mother of addict slams, San Francisco open air drug policies. Basically, these mothers are seeing that their kids who were borderline, their addiction is being enabled by this homeless industrial complex, right? So that is actually the angle where you can see this is not compassionate. No. It's actually zombifying a previously functional human being in the name of, quote, compassion, but it's actually, turning somebody into a dependent when they could have potentially stood on their own feet and been independent with a different, form of intervention. This is very similar to how these NGOs, this nonprofit industrial complex, they want to be these saviors in Africa and India and so on and so forth. And really, investment is independence and charity is dependence. Like Easterly and Levine have written about, stopping the aid and so on, because the aid is basically something which is meant to give the person who's, quote, giving it out a good feeling, right? But it's all the whole, teach a man to fish versus give a man
Jesus.
To fish,
Jesus said this 2,000 years ago, right?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So actually, but if you also look, there's this article by Priceonomics, which is about the most effective development program in human history. Have you heard this one?
No. Is it the U.S. Army or something?
No, it's actually Nigeria's most effective development plan in human history was just a business plan competition.
Oh, really?
Guess what? Wealth creation. Basically, the thing is, you can do, I've talked about this before, but if you've got a rich guy, okay, they can do one of two things. They can say, I'm giving out grants or I'm making investments, right? If you're giving out grants for a nonprofit or for individuals, what'll you get? You're going to get a queue of people who are each competing to be the most pathetic or sympathetic, right? In extremis, this is like Slumdog Millionaire, where they chop off the limbs of this poor beggar to make them more sympathetic, okay? There's actually like learned helplessness. They actually harm in a sense, either right? They make themselves out to be, they think of themselves as being as harmed as possible, right? And you actually see this in, there's the tech insta brag versus the woke insta sag. What is the insta sag? It's basically, I'm, autistic, disabled, X, Y, and
maximal intersectionality, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maximum intersectionality. I'm the maximum victim. I have established that I am at the absolute bottom. Therefore, you need to put me at the absolute top, right? The powerful victim, right? Yeah. So basically, because they're at the absolute bottom, they win the status competition, right? They are now at the top of the queue for the grant because they're the most pathetic and they're the most deserving. How could you possibly give somebody else some money? And this is a learned helplessness to win the game that's being set up. And what happens is, of 100 people who are in the queue for that grant, maybe one person, quote, wins by being the most pathetic. They really go all in. They're the method actor, so to speak, right? And the other 99 make themselves weaker in the process. They think, they think of them, woe is me, they rend their garments, right, et cetera.
Right.
By contrast, when folks are competing for an investment, rather than the woke insta sag, you have the tech insta brag. The insta brag is like, I graduated MIT in physics in 3 years, and I, had my first startup at this, and we got to 1 mil rev, and we sold it to this, right? And often, what you'll find is the same person, okay, who's like a talented college graduate, will unconsciously talk about all of their victimhood in one context, and then talk about what a killer they are in a different context, and they'll make that. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, I've had that, for the scenario where it's like, I've come to here, and now my Amex points are, they're not transferable to the Delta Lounge, and I'm like, wait a second, I thought you were like, this long suffering,
Yeah, right. Well, but actually, though, even more than that, it's not like, yes, that's the fact that they're upper middle class, but the thing is that in order to get an investment, right? Like in tech, there's this sort of insta brag, 5-second intro that people will use at parties or whatever. It's not actually, it's just like, it's so much as, oh, he, I know he's a core contributor to jQuery. or
it's like on
yeah, she was
Tinder,
one of the
they pose and their Rolex is showing. Or, yeah, there's like
well, so
startup
that's the issue.
founder, Stanford grad. I mean,
That's the thing is, so I think there's a very important difference here.
Yeah.
You're bringing it back to their frequent flyer lounge or their Rolex, and it's not really about the display of wealth. That's actually not what it is. It is the display of competence. First 10 employees at Stripe. It is the, I was a core contributor to jQuery. It is a technical or
YC, YC class.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Insofar as money is quoted, it is we got the company to a 10 million valuation and is acquired by Facebook or whatever, like 100 million valuation is acquired, right? And so it's not that, oh, I have a Rolex. Nobody respects that. That's like
gaudy.
That's it. Huh? Go ahead.
It's gaudy. Yeah, it's
gaudy. Yeah. I mean, like I shouldn't say nobody respects. I'm sure
they do on Tinder. I'm told that they have to have some way of differentiating the three guys that are going to get the competing for the one girl, right?
that may be the case, right? But it's also like, who are you going to attract with that or whatever? Yeah, fine. Right. But let's say that there's maybe something to that. Point is, so what I'm talking about though here is, the instant kind of demonstration of victimhood status versus the instant demonstration of victor status. Like I am the most convincing victim and I'm the most convincing victor. Those are the two different things, right? Where you've got 100 people that are competing for this VC investment or angel investment, and each person is just straining, be like, close one more deal, right? Ship one more feature, improve the design just a bit to kind of pip the other one and get that investment, right? Now, what happens in that context? Yeah, just like it's like 100 people running a 400-meter dash. Okay. It's true, only one wins, but the other 99, their cardiovascular fitness is improved in the process, right? These folks competing for that investment, that one investment of $100,000 makes 99 people stronger, right? They become better at building, better at designing. Even if they don't win this time, they become overall as wealth creating for the community, right? And that's why this, if you actually, the true charity is investment because you're investing in their independence. I mean, another way to see this, by the way, is like, if you're walking down the street and let's say someone makes $100,000 a year, okay, and they see somebody, who's just down on their luck. Okay, if you give them $10, right? Someone might give them $10. Now that's $10 and $99,909 for the person walking down the street. That person walking down the street, though, is very unlikely to give that guy $1,000, let alone $50,000, and actually make them equal, right? So that person doesn't actually want equality. If they were giving $30,000, $40,000, they're like, wait a second, I earned this money. Why am I giving it away? That immediately kicks in once it's beyond just like I feel sorry for you. Here's a few coins.
Right. Yeah. That's why you'll have Sheryl Sandberg have a press release for giving $1 million to the ACLU, which is 0.0001% of her net worth.
Yeah. So but here's what's happening is what people are doing with that consciously or unconsciously is sometimes they're assuaging guilt. Sometimes if it's a public donation like that, they're buying status.
Yeah.
But what happens is charity decelerates, right? That is to say, the closer you get to income equality, the more that person rises, the less the money comes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Which means charity never actually attains equality. If that person's at 0, you might give them 10, right? But if that person even had 10,000 or 20,000, if they were like working class and on their feet, you wouldn't, people wouldn't give them, $10. They'd say, okay, you're on your feet, go, right? By contrast, with investment, this is a very famous example. There's many, millions of not famous examples. When Peter Thiel invested in Zuck was much less wealthy than him. Now Zuck is much wealthier than him, but both of them benefited in the process, right?
Yeah.
That's like putting $10,000 into somebody. Now they're worth $1 million.
At least until last week. I mean, Peter said he's off the board, and then Meta has crashed, which we're going to get to because I do want to get.
Okay, sure. Point being that basically with investment, you're actually incentivized to make them richer than you. Yeah. And with charity, you're not, right? Mm-hmm. Charity, in order for it to continue, they have to be poorer than you. They have to be in a dependent role, et cetera, right? So a huge part of this stuff is, in my view, a combination of gaining status while having a crew of dependents. It's the same process that was run overseas in many of these quote third world countries
to keep people dependent that's now being run in American cities. Now you said what would be what have to change to come back to California or whatever. I gave again, I think of this as highly implausible, but let's just do it for the mental exercise, right? Someone asked me about this with like the chips thing. And I was like, because I was like, you can't ban your way to number one. Okay. This is this recent thing where we say, and it's like how to become number one in tech. Okay. Here's some obvious points. For STEM education, not math is white supremacy. For technology, like a pro tech culture, not lol tech bro, right? For skilled immigration, not like multi-100-day visa delays for like basic things. You can't even get like a B1 or whatever to come to you.
Yeah,
like
H1B. Yeah.
No, but actually different. H1B is like a permanent work visa.
Yeah.
B1 is just like a visitor visa, right? That itself, there's 100-day delays to attend a conference. You're not even trying to immigrate. To attend a conference is huge pain, right? Pro wealth creation, not abolish billionaires, right? Pro civilization, not what's happening in San Francisco, right? And I think, unfortunately, I mean, civilizations have like a heartbeat, and in different ways, like China and India and other civilizations are like on the rise, and like blue America is just in some fundamental ways on the decline. In some ways, they're still they've got something. I mean, what do I actually think happens? It's possible. This is the somewhat dystopian outcome, and that's somewhat very dystopian outcome, which is, San Francisco actually hasn't been pushed to the limit of what it could be. If you take it to the limit, you have a few engineers coding AI in their rooms with, DoorDash being delivered, and outside a, sea of fatherless, drug addicted zombies that, these NGOs are getting addicted on syringes. Like, how far can you push that, right? San Francisco is like running the experiment of like basically turning a previously functional city into shanty towns and a few tech people, right? I don't think the tech people are causing that.
No.
I think they managed to survive despite that. I think it's the NGOs. I think it's the government, the state that is causing that. But the tech people are indirectly subsidizing it by being present and by paying. They are themselves enabling the enablers, right? By living in San Francisco, you are voting for more San Francisco.
Yeah.
Right. That's like, no matter what you quote vote for, you're actually enabling it by actually physically being there and contributing to it. And so if you want less of it, it's only words if you cast some vote or something like that. Truly, symbolizing it is going somewhere else and doing what our ancestors did and moving, whether it's you think of it as a frontier, whether you think of it as moving in search of a better life, whether you think of it as voting with your feet or a protest vote, there's many different ways of thinking about that. But really, it is moving on from something that really has failed, partly because it was so rich. They got so rich that they could just do anything, and the money would keep rolling in. They didn't have a connection between cause and effect. Now they're finally seeing it with people going to Miami. That's the only thing that's giving them some degree of correction, right? Is that exit. Nothing else, actually.
As you say, as long as they're the number 4 economy in the world here, and
that's momentum.
Yeah.
That's momentum, and I think I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah. So I'm
not saying it's going to zero overnight, but I am saying that it's definitely no longer. The crucial thing is, it no longer has power in a fundamental sense. Like Microsoft 2022 is wealthier than Microsoft 2000, but it's far less powerful. Yeah. It's no longer a choke point on the whole tech industry, right? Mm-hmm. And you do not need to come to Silicon Valley to raise money. You don't need to come there to incorporate a company. You don't need it. Sandhill is just less relevant. For example, A16Z, that's why they've gone full remote. They've gone full cloud. Like tech is global. It's decentralized. Thankfully, in a sense, we've decentralized opportunity. I mean, that's the flip side of this. Now, if you're in Manila or, you're in, South America or the Middle East or the Midwest, you've got as much opportunity as if you're in the middle of Sandhill. And that's awesome, right? So there's a huge benefit to not having everything centralized, concentrated, quote, unequal, et cetera, in California, in Silicon Valley. I mean, what a risk for the technology industry to be in the worst governed city, in the worst governed state in the world, right? Relative to its wealth, it's like the worst governed. And the wealth is what enables that. It's like giving a ton of money to this heir who just puts it up their nose, right? That's what San Francisco is.
And yet we're doing, we're giving rebates and gas inflation, bonuses sending out here in California because we obviously have too much money. I mean, my favorite statistic is the NASA budget, for all of 2020 is lower than the Los Angeles Unified School District budget. And you look at how much NASA does, and it's just incredible. And you think the solution is just obvious. It's not throwing more money at it. It's getting people that actually care about it going to, what do they do in other countries? I mean, don't they go to school year round? I mean, I get paid a very handsome salary by the state of California. I'm not complaining. I'm a state employee. Gavin Newsom is my ultimate boss, right? I shouldn't speak too much about it.
True, I guess.
But the point is, I would be doing this job even if I didn't get paid. I love it so much. I love being a scientist. I love working with people. Doesn't mean it couldn't be, infinitely better. And I wonder, you mentioned this. A lot of what I'm seeing nowadays is kind of this nexus around colleges. I'm coming to think of, ironically, in my profession as sort of, one of the STEM causes for some of these challenges. I mean, the ideologies that come out. I mean, what you're explaining in the kind of extrapolation of the end of modern history, maybe the Fujiyama's kind of tortured saying. But more than that is sort of like, well, what's next? Is China inevitably going to become like woke San Francisco if they continue on this? Is it like an inevitable dialectic of history? But I see all these ideas originate in the university system, and those come from the pattern of basically the old world. I mean, the most Humboldt and the institutions of Germany that educated the first PhDs in America, and now kind of doctors of education, et cetera, that set public school policies. And now we have like my kids go to school 9 months of the year. Why is that? I mean, do they not have stuff to do? I've read a statistic that actually the biggest discrepancy between economically disadvantaged kids and non-disadvantaged kids was sometimes, unfortunately, used as a proxy for black and white or minorities or whatever. I don't want to get into that, but the study disaggregates by that. Anyway, the biggest difference is that the wealthier kids do something over the summer. In other words, they're not idle for 3 months during the summer. They're doing something, even if it's going to a water park. They're interacting, they're solving problems, they're doing some kind of thing out of the house. And then obviously it's best to have some kind of enrichment program, but the poor kids don't have that. And it would be so obvious, like just keep school open at 12 months of the year. Why should a public art teacher be tenured in the state of California, in a school? What do they need tenure for? Academic freedom? Are they doing research that's so on the cutting edge? I don't even think I need tenure. I should get your opinion about academia. First of all,
well, so ahead. I mean,
there's
a ton I could say in academia, but I'll give a very quick version. I've talked about this at length in various other podcasts, but I'll paste on a link at the end. Short version is independent replication over prestigious citation. Essentially, what's happened is academia has mistaken the form for the substance. The entire infrastructure of NSF and NIH and universities and journals and so on is just a superstructure on top of the fundamental. I mean, it's got a few different origins, but this I'm just taking the STEM part of it. All of that is a superstructure on one person telling another person how to replicate an experiment. That's actually all that truly matters. If you cannot independently replicate the experiment, it's not science. It may be published in a scientific journal. It may look like we think of it with the academic affiliations. It may have the form, but if the data isn't available, if the protocol isn't available, if the methods are not independently replicable, it's not actually science. If you cannot replicate it, it's not science.
That's right.
That actually kills a huge amount of stuff which is talked about as science, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, it also allows you to rank papers. Everyone talks about citations,
H-index,
factor.
which is invented here at UCSD, by the way, my colleague Jorge Hirsch.
Yeah, and there's something. The thing is, it's an interesting proxy variable.
Not
but actually, what you want to do is you want to rank papers, or more generally ideas, by the number of replications, not the number of citations. Maxwell's equations has trillions and trillions of replications. Some paper that came out in Science or Nature last week, that purports to be, this is how this virus works or whatever, that has probably 0 replications. And we're not tracking the number of replications. That's way more important than the number of citations.
Although once we do to push back respectfully, I mean, once you get the Higgs boson mass, it's not like, we have to do it 65 trillion times, again and again, that doesn't add incremental surprise or reduce entropy.
I don't know about that. And the reason is because, for example, think about code. Okay. When you have a piece of software, you are effectively, it's not simply a paper, you are replicating the results because you're running it again locally millions of times. And in doing that, what do you find? Well, first of all, you'll find it doesn't work on this platform or that platform. But you'll also start surfacing 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million bugs, which in doing it a few times, you might not have seen them, but you surface race conditions, threads that are competing with each other, rare things that arise under odd circumstances. And by just replicating it tons of times, you find that kind of stuff, right? And I do think that if you've got just something which is true on the basis of one expensive experiment, you don't really know how true it is. It is only if you can just do it over and over again, and you've reduced it not just to a science, but to an engineering, that you can then think of it, if it's flaky science in the sense of it kind of works, kind of doesn't, it's like, you have to get the instrumentation just so and hold it just so, versus something that's highly robust, then it's not a subroutine that you can use for something else. Like the light doesn't just flick on and you can just assume it's going to work, right? Mm-hmm. So I actually do think much more emphasis on replication. And this is, it's not unique to me, of course. People talk about the reproducibility crisis in many areas, but that's like one thing I think is rotten at the core. There's so much more of it. Basically you asked, will China become like a, woke San Francisco? They actually had their opium period already.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
Our futures are past, right? Like it is now America's time to have its own quote, fentanyl wars or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. I think part of it is with the, so some comments on these. If you've just been born to number one and you haven't done what it takes to remain number one, people think being number one is their birthright. I wrote this article and it's called Founding versus Inheriting. The people who are especially running the U.S. establishment now are like the third or fifth generation heirs of a factory that cranks out widgets. And, they have the name and they legitimately inherit it. Okay. They've gone through the process to do this, but they're completely incapable of changing the factory to crank out something different or innovate on it, right? These are not people who could organize the US military from scratch. Everybody who had any talent to found has been drained out of the US establishment into tech. And so what that means is you have folks who are adversely selected. They're the folks who are often less quantitative, or they're less good with budgets or numbers. And those are the folks who remain in the US establishment with everybody else going into tech. And then what happens there is it's not the typical theory of comparative advantage. You know why?
Oh, it's like the Peter principle, right? Like rising to their level of incompetence and they happen to master that domain.
Yes, it is that. But it's also something where it's like, if I'm making apples and you're making oranges, fine. I can take it or leave it if you're right. If I'm making Apple computers and this person is making governance, that is not a trade I can refuse. Right? Mm-hmm. So basically, comparative advantage does not work if you're outsourcing your governance to others. This is a fundamental, you see what I'm saying? Right? Yeah. So this is a fundamental issue where there's no gains from trade. There's huge losses from trade. We have left the government of the United States, the establishment of the United States, to these kleptocratic incompetence and all the folks who can add. You can see this where, a while back, there was this clip on, let me get it right. It was Brian Williams and Mara Gay. Okay. So where they,
he's talking about like Brian a trillion, like what the population of America is like 1 trillion people or something.
Yeah, it was like, Bloomberg could give $1 million per US resident. And they flashed a tweet. It was such a ludicrous thing where they flashed a tweet on screen that said, that Bloomberg could give every American $1 million. And they just, it wasn't just that they got it wrong on screen. It was that they didn't have any sense. They couldn't just do basic long division. They couldn't, there's no sanity check there. They really thought of rich people as being so much richer than they actually are. They, the entire production staff for this media outlet didn't have the most basic contact with reality. And that actually is it's like you know what a dye test is, DYE? It's like sometimes, or a smoke test. Sometimes you'll take some dye and you'll kind of put it through a system and you'll just see.
Like an exhaust system, see if there's a leak or something. Right?
See if there's a leak, right? So this is sort of like you're tracking something through a system. You're seeing these people can't add, multiply, subtract, or divide. Okay.
But they have blue check marks. They got blue check marks. Yeah.
They have verbal ability and they can act. They can act. Yeah, exactly. They have verbal ability and they have status, so they can act, but they cannot add.
Yeah.
And so it is like Dr. Nick, in The Simpsons. He plays a doctor on TV, right?
Right.
And so for these people to make policy recommendations, policy equals budget. Budget involves division. And, forget about NPV and talking about like that's not even like that advanced math. You can't even divide, $1 million. Divide properly to figure out that Bloomberg.
But do you think it's that it's not appealing? Like, I was noting that there's basically no governor, no senator, all these hotly contested, races and stuff, and backed by this billionaire. Like, there's not one race in the whole country where anyone's brought up science and technology. They haven't even brought it up.
Yeah,
a governor. It's insane. And the number of like scientists in any government around the world, I think is pitifully low. I know there's like one or two physicists, and but I also wanted to ask you, when you think about governing of a country or something like that, I've done a video that's knowledge is not equal to wisdom, and I've interviewed 14 Nobel Prize winners on this podcast, and I'm always trying to see if a sufficient amount of knowledge can actually be converted into wisdom. And I haven't come to any sort of conclusion about it, but I guess the question that I have is, who would you want to run a country? And I guess in your case, maybe you're saying, the people run it, but I mean, isn't that the kind of Churchill quote that the people, get the government they deserve and they deserve to get it good and hard?
Well, so first, by the way, one thing I want to say is, if you look at I mentioned this example of the math errors and so on.
Yeah.
Look at this other tweet that I linked there, the Lorena Gonzalez one. Okay.
Yep.
She was replying to Mike Solana, who's a VC associate at Founders Fund.
Yeah.
Or VP at Founders Fund, rather. And she's like, serious question, how does it feel to be a billionaire while promoting companies that leave workers in poverty? Do you ever feel bad about the massive inequality? It's not every day that a billionaire engages me on Twitter. They just think of billionaire as being a big number. Right. Yeah. This is the same as when Bernie Sanders,
guess where she lives, by the way, Balaji.
Is where she lives in San Diego?
Yeah.
No. Okay, great. So, of course, Mike Solana is like, well, thank you very much. I don't even know if Mike Solana has $1 million. Like, Mike Solana is a great guy, he's a smart guy. He works at FF, but he's not Peter Thiel, right?
Right.
And what you realize is, these people don't understand what billion means. And then you realize, wait a second, of course, they're listening to Bernie, and Bernie is saying millionaires and billionaires.
Right.
And
as if they say they're 1,000 times different.
Yeah, exactly. It's like saying meters and kilometers.
Right.
Right? Meters and kilometers. Right. Like that's
these NBA players are so tall, they're meters and kilometers tall.
Right. And the ratio of millionaires, I mean, like there's I don't know, depending on how you count, it's like certainly on the order of 5 to 10%. At last I saw, I may be wrong on the stat, but it's a non-trivial number of people, if you include House or whatever, that have over $1 million net worth in the US. Whereas billionaires is like a few thousand in the world. It's a much, much different thing.
Correct.
So you realize, so that's like 3 examples, like Brian Williams and Mara Gay, that's Lorena Gonzalez, that's Bernie Sanders. They don't actually know what a billion is. Like, forget everything else. We're talking about, what FizzBuzz is?
No.
FizzBuzz is a very basic, programming question, okay, which you ask candidates, okay, and it's like, let me get the. It's basically like print the numbers from 1 to 100, and for each multiple of 3, print fizz instead of the number, and for each multiple of 5, print buzz, and if it's a multiple of 3 and 5, print FizzBuzz. I think that's basically the thing, right? And this is not like rocket surgery, okay? Brain surgery. It's not rocket science, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's for effect. It's like you understand.
Yeah.
Basically division, right? You do
right.
a for loop, right? And many people cannot pass this.
Right.
Like an
Well, they done
incredible
test.
number of people.
Kahneman did the test with Princeton seniors, and if a factory makes 5 widgets in 5 hours or whatever, how many does
Yeah.
100 make in 100 hours? They couldn't
So,
get half
so,
of them got it wrong. Yeah.
so the question you're asking of, oh, why don't they talk about science and technology? They don't know what a billion is.
And
They
also their
don't.
counterpart. She's the same woman. You know what else she's famous for? There's our lovely Congress Assemblywoman here.
Oh, the one that said "F you" to Elon Musk.
Yeah, and he said, "Message
Yeah,
received."
exactly. Help
Set
drive.
up $100
That's
billion
right.
company and left.
Yeah, that's right. So, like,
It cost-
basically, these folks are. I mean, they. It's like the question of why don't they understand the implications of artificial intelligence and VR and cryptocurrency and whatever. That's just so far beyond. We're talking like it's in a different galaxy. These people cannot do FISBAs. Like you can't overestimate. The problem is, by the way, they're verbal and they can act. And so they can give the facade of competence.
Yeah.
But if you actually gave them a basic test of math, they would recoil like garlic. This is actually why, by the way, including even a single equation in anything you're writing, makes them
cuts it in half, right? Cuts the readership.
Well, actually, what it does, yes, that's the conventionalism. Every equation cuts your audience half. But what it actually does is it makes a certain kind of very, confident political actor recoil in fear, because it's like having Chinese characters in the essay. They don't necessarily understand it. So they're like, oh, okay, I'm kind of
right. So I went to Paris once, and I went to the waiter, and I took 1 year of high school French, but I was with a woman, American woman, who had lived there for 30 years, and she was only like 40. She spoke you couldn't even tell. The waiter comes up and asks for our order. She orders in French. Waiter says, "It's okay, madame. You can speak American to me." I said, "Oh yeah." Well, I would take 6 of those for 4 costs. The guy's like, "Oh, he couldn't write it out." It's like, okay, well, you want to play that game? We can play that game. There's no problem. But if you probe them, it's like the old joke, like on the surface they're deep, but deep down they're superficial. And I think, they're smart. They're not dummies. They to get to a level of competency in any field, let alone to master this game. It's not like they hand it out. You can make fun of
right. So
here's a community organizer. He's a very gifted human being, very intelligent. But does that mean wise? Not necessarily.
So right. So here's the thing: to give a little bit to these, innumerates, right? It is actually the case that
just thinking of that when they have the Simpsons, they have the Council of Elders or whatever, and they're like, well, we have to. Skinner says, we have to give the sub of megalodoids or whatever, some credit.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. So just in like the time we have left, basically, it actually is true that in addition to being able to do the math, you also need the skills of a political leader and or actor or what have you, right? Or influencer, a better way of thinking about it. And so someone like Elon actually does have both skills, right? He can do the math, but he can also convince. And so that's actually what you need. Is you can't just say, oh, we wish that charisma-less engineers would run the country. You need charismatic engineers, right, to run the country. Yeah. And how do you actually, do that? Otherwise, you're not going to build anything. But how do you do that? Well, they have to be able to found. And how they found, well, that's the network state. So we come back to that, right? You cannot complain. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say in the last couple of minutes, I think, persuasion, salesmanship, it's a dirty word, but actually it's incredibly important, and to have persuasive ability to do so. There's sort of a seductive element. Robert Greene has talked about this. So I know you only have a couple minutes. Maybe someday we'll get to do a part 2, but I just want to comment one last thing on the dark side of networks. I'm always using it to encourage people to have big families, using Metcalfe's law, the kind of, benefits of having multiple children is that now they're friends with each other.
Brian Kaplan's book and so on this.
Yeah. So they'll be friends with each other. And then when you're dead, the parents are dead, then at least the kids' relationship will be sustained. And also, it's not like you need a new house if you add a kid, but you add on, maybe might double the size of the network, and the happiness might scale with the number, squared, and the cost might scale as n. So, but there's always a dark side, right? There's always a node that can go rogue or can go bad, or the niece of Osama bin Laden who was using Instagram that led them to get his DNA for whatever. There's always some element of risk in the network. And I'm reminded of another Yiddish kind of story where there's a rabbi, and he's in town, and one of his congregants says some evil speech about him. In Hebrew, we call it lashon hara, evil speech. And it tells some gossip, which is true. It's not a lie. It's true about him, whatever it is. And then he feels really bad. Yom Kippur comes along. He wants to repent. He says to the rabbi, "Rabbi, how can I make it up to you?" Rabbi says, "Okay, my friend, just get me a feather pillow." Gets him a feather pillow. Great. What's next? He goes, "Cut the feather pillow open." Okay, great. Yeah, I can do that. Am I forgiven? No. There's one last thing. As the wind is swirling around, go pick up all the feathers. What are the risks inherent in a network state? Not just the upside, which you've categorized so nicely in the book.
Sure. I mean, what most people will come to, what most will say is, "Oh my God, you're so unrealistic. It's never going to work, et cetera, et cetera." And they'll say, "Oh, in particular," what people always come back to is use of force. UN what army? Where's the military? You don't have nukes, blah blah. And there's a long and short answer to that. Go ahead. What?
No, I'm just laughing. You don't have nukes. So that would be a good thing in nowadays, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's basically something where they're just sort of reacting at the surface level on something. The reason the internet was invented in part, like DARPA funded it for something that
was nuclear conflict, right?
Exactly. That's right. Those resistant to, and we might actually need to go back to that future where, in the event that Putin or whatever sets off a nuke and the nuclear taboo is broken, you may want to have governance structures that are nuke resistant, right? And you can't nuke a network. How would you nuke Bitcoin? That actually is something where, you're going to nuke billions of people that you don't even know where they are. You need to have an XY location, and they need to be implicitly concentrated in one physical location. If you're distributed, that's actually something that makes nuclear weapons less useful, right? It's only if you're sessile and fixed to a location and you have a lot of fixed structures and so on and so forth. And if people know where your location is, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of things where folks haven't really thought about just like we talked about earlier, the cloud geography versus land geography. People have not thought about what actually security looks like in an environment where people are highly mobile, where capital is mobile, where you can encrypt things, where you can distribute and decentralize things. It's not to say that force goes away, but force looks a lot more like drones than nukes, and a lot more like, special ops than huge armies, right? And it's much more surgical, and it's tweezers, and it's, scalpels. It's not sledgehammers, right? And so they haven't thought about what force looks like in a network world. That's not to say that no sledgehammers exist. There's still obviously huge sledgehammers being deployed in Ukraine and back and forth. But a lot of that is actually also still cloud war. It's also network war. Ukraine wouldn't be where it is without being able to wage a really effective cloud war against, Russia's traditional kind of land war. So I think, you asked what the downsides are. That's one downside is just that, I think, which is not exactly what you're asking, but one downside is folks will try to map this to the things that they've already seen without thinking about how technology has changed things. It's a little bit like cryptocurrency, a lot like cryptocurrency, where it would, some people get it right away, and for some people, they just have to kind of see it working for a while. So one downside is you just have to make it work before people believe it, but that's fine. The critical thing is, for something like this, you don't have to convince everybody. You just have to convince enough people that you can get a small percent. Only a small percentage of people, for example, move to the US. That changed the world. You didn't get the majority of people to move to the US. You didn't even get 10% of the world to move to the US. Only 4% of the world is in the US. And many of those were born from folks who moved there, right? So a tiny percentage moving to the frontier can change everything. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the quote lack of majority appeal or what have you, is it bad? It's actually good in some ways, right? So that's kind of my quick answer to that.
There you go. All right, I know you have to go. I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll do a part 2 someday, maybe in person. If I ever get where you are, you come back to Long Island, we'll meet up in Ronkonkoma. How about that, Balaji?
Ronkonkoma, there you go. Meet me in
Montauk.
Montauk.
Montauk, yeah, that's even better. East Hampton.
All right,
Bye, my
thank
friend.
you.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.